And then I think we can move to the final part, the discussion. And so I will invite Lia, Ehsan, and yeah, I guess Vesna, you can stay. And then Igors Gubenko, who will be the moderator. So Igors is a philosopher and editor of the Contemporary Philosophy and Literature website.
Well, one way to start a discussion after a series of very engaging, insightful presentations with witnesses today would be to ask, to return like to the very beginning and ask about what this concept of the archive that we have been using today, what it really means. Because for some reason I think that we don't have one single stable concept. I mean, we operate with, of course, somewhat similar ideas about what an archive is, but in different contexts we can see that they are not identical. Well, on the other hand, considering the fact that it's really late and such a discussion about what an archive actually is as such could go on for hours, I think this would not be a good way to proceed, and so I would rather, return to this issue of the relations between archive and power that has been highlighted especially in the presentations of the second part. And I'm thinking, of course, of Vesna's talk and Ehsan's talk. Maybe I could pose the question as follows. Let's say that the traditional understanding of the archive and the historical institution of the archive has some close link to something like the nation state, and thus also the colonial, let's say, attitude, presumably by engaging with this traditionally archive and its traditional understanding, contemporary art, people working in the field of contemporary art, artists, art theorists, curators, they would probably be willing to somehow, let's say, counteract this implicit, often not so easy to, not so obvious power and the colonial and the national heritage of the archive. Obviously, in this case, we would have to speak about different critical practices and deconstructive practices aimed at this already established and hegemonic archive. I think the examples of you both are, to a great extent, testify, kind of given examples of such an approach. The other approach would be to establish alternative archives to counteract the existing models of knowledge and memory, because basically archives are institutionalized systems of knowledge production and of memory. The second possible approach would be to create establish alternative archives. And I think, Lia, your project to a great extent has to do with the second approach. So you counteract and you kind of try to fill in the blanks and the spaces, the empty spaces in the existing institutionalized archives by not by criticizing these archives, but by creating your own alternative collection. But what seems problematic to me in the second case, and we could of course list here in this kind of second approach different projects involving, you know, for instance, to refer to something that we've heard today, involving collecting oral history or researching like microhistories that Kaspar Svanaks told us about, etc., etc. But my problem with this kind of initiatives would be that there is always a possibility that on some unreflected, unconscious level, these alternative archives, they reproduce some patterns, some dominant models, dominant archiving practices, exactly because the critical work, the critique of these existing models has, in certain cases, not been performed. And for instance, referring to your presentation, I remember at one point you used this metaphor about English, the English language, saying that you don't have to invent one because, you know, it's already there. You just have to learn it. So basically, you go, you look at the Western practices, and you kind of learn from there.
Not learn. What makes sense, you borrow. Yes.
Yes.
Not copy paste.
Mm-hmm.
If it makes sense, you use, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but first, okay, I cannot speak in the name of all the alternative archives and so on now. Referring to mine, I will say that in this time of overwhelming information, it's really an emergency to rethink things.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit without being conscious. At the beginning, I did it what I needed. But let's say after a while, I was, and now I'm capable of analyzing what I did and why it could be relevant. I self-empower myself. Instead of going in an institution in Romania, where in the gallery, in the acquisition institution or something like that, connected with the Ministry of Culture, where I understood that they have files of all the events, exhibitions, artists, and so on, not structured on issues and so on, was dusty, and was a loss of time. For me, my archive, was a kind of quick professional institution. I wanted to be able to learn how to present my stuff, what I used to do or I was doing like an artist, but in such a way that people could understand what I'm doing. I mean, why to play naive and of course I had to name it performance art. I cannot name it after I know the history of performance. Why to name it in different ways? So that's why I was reading a lot, buying things and collecting them, books I'm referring, to establish a kind of frame, a platform, professional platform for me and the other artists and theoreticians to understand what we are talking about. Because in Romania, not only me, I didn't know all this history of 50 years. So even now, they try to explain installation, performance, and so on. It's like, for me, it was like we had only short-term memory. Hello, this is performance. Hello, this is performance. And we don't continue to long-term memory when we start to analyze what we do, for what reason, and so on. So I needed to recuperate this. Zdenka Badovinac from Ljubljana, from Moderna Gallery, she was having an exhibition on archives about interrupted history. Her question is, our history was interrupted. Maybe theirs, no, or Polish or yours or whatever, but I consider my history, Romanian history, being interrupted for 50 years.
So do we here in Latvia, I would say.
Yeah. I don't want to talk too much. Anyway, I think an archive, thinking of myself, it's having background, in the background, like a reason, a need. Either of a person, of an institution, or whatever. If that need is not honest, then we talk blah blah. So it's very important to build something true. Doesn't matter how small is your gesture, to make sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, just kind of as a reflection to what you were saying, and I mean, how I got into archives was by working with two artists. We had an initiative, and they got me into archives, because before that, as an anthropologist, you don't really go into archives, or that's not usually the place you're trained to go. You go to field research and you talk to people, etc. You rarely go into archives. But through, let's say, artistic, their own desire that we had to go to the archives, like if you're reading about Walter Benjamin and you're in Berlin, the most logical thing is to go to the archive there and see what they have and try to see what kind of person, is there or created there. So in that's how I got into archives, actually, through working with artists. And for me, they became really a place of wonders. You can see so many things by analyzing that archive, and especially the power relations, the role of the state. One of my favorite places is where the official Michel Foucault archive is, because French state has this kind of, it's highly regarded, preserving history is highly regarded, and there is this place in Normandy, close to Caen, city called Caen, and it's a former abbey, so you go into this monastery basically, which is renovated, and it's an incredible place where they host actually like archives or 20, 30 important French thinkers, writers, etc. Yes, and it's like I wanted to research on Foucault, and then I was like, okay, I have to find where is the official archive. Then you go there, you start working there, and you realize it's full of gaps. It's not official. That's not his art. It's very controlled. So it's a very interesting place about someone whose work was about power. And archive, the whole his life was about that. To kind of see where is his archive, and then all the time I'm like, okay, no, there is so much missing, and then you discover, but actually they also have in Berkeley one part. Then I'm sure in his former apartment, that's where big part of the archive is. So the official, but it's protected by state. His archive is protected by state. You cannot sell, to Americans. Because, for instance, there are some. You cannot sell things. It's considered a national treasure. So you cannot sell documents to another state. Like some years ago, it was like officially, the court protects those documents as the highest, you know, of highest value for the French state. So it's yeah, just I think if you were interested in some things, you have to go to archives, like any kind of archives or any kind of topic, and you can find yeah, they're really special places. Not always comfortable, very dusty, but yeah.
Okay, speaking of this kind of archive research and the possibility of this research to become a genuine artistic practice, speaking of your work, for instance, the part of which you presented today, do you think it's something completely different from artistic practice? So this kind of research that you do.
Well, I mean, then we have to go, you know, the author or the artist is an author, which is a huge debatable place, because I don't want to, you know, insult the profession of artists in a sense, because it's a particular training, it's a particular, which I highly respect, but it has historical and economic things attached to it. You know, the authorship, like this kind of taking copyright on something, because that's what art, you know, my practice means you have copyright on certain practice also. Like if you're repeating an action that was done by an artist before, everyone's going to say, oh, but you know, you're repeating. So there is this kind of problematic, you know, the copyright on things, and also about taking certain products of some other people and turning them into your own work for economic gain, or kind of becoming, well, fame in some cases, doesn't matter, but there is this, all those things, which I remember there was one debate. I was in New York 2 years ago, and it was about, well, Nan Goldin was there, and then somehow I don't know how it's kind of like, it occurred to me, and I said, in a way, if there was Nan Goldin, you wouldn't have Google. So there is this kind of, you know, certain things that were that were stolen from the practice of artists and turned into Silicon Valley ideology and economic gain, because what we do on Facebook every day, we are archiving our lives. So it's, you know, personal, intimate, so it's not only the way to control and to know who is doing what, but it's also, you know, this kind of practice became normalized through the art practices in a way. And I don't think, I'm not sure if the artists are aware that this was stolen, or, you know, like it's not about blaming someone, but there is a certain link there.
Yeah, especially if you look at the history of photography, and how it's then, you know, this technique, how is it used in, for example, let's say in France, is used as also a way of identifying criminals, just to take photographs of them, and in a special way that it was, for example, the ears were photographed, the eyes were photographed, and the nose were photographed. So, and then of course later, when they discovered the fingerprints, also many fingerprints were photographed and were kept in archives of really huge warehouses where they had lots of cabinets full of records of fingerprints. So there you have also this mixture of, you know, what we have now as more Facebook, or I don't know, different kind of surveillance system that use, they used, well, you know, now with iPhone you have the fingerprints and you don't know where it's going, but that's the mixture of, you know, art and, well, it was, you know, the avant-garde that tried to bring technology into art, and then from there, well, you don't know where the technology takes you.
Okay, Ehsan, I have a question to you as an artist. You spoke also in your presentation about media and the power of the media as this grand system defining our perception of the world around us and structuring our understanding of history, basically. So my question would be, in what ways do you think contemporary art could be especially efficient in engaging with, critically engaging with this kind of media power? Because, well, you could also expect that some academic kind of research, you know, discourse analysis and critique could maybe be more efficient. But do you have an idea?
I think so. I think definitely the academics could be sometimes more effective than artists, and activism could be. Usually, activism is a lot more effective than artists' practice. I have to be really honest about this. And I myself also like surf between being an artist and activist, or well, try to be engaged more into academics' readings and writings. Because as I remember, as you said in your talk, that is not efficient anymore to be just an artist with one certain, you know, kind of practice that we keep in. Most of the artists, as we know, have already like multidisciplinary practices, and you know, even some of them have some technical skills that are used either for producing art or having social impacts or earning money. So yeah, as we all know, you know, most of the people right now, because of what is happening in the economical system, they have to have this, you know, multiply skills of, you know, changing jobs from one day to the other and trying to, you know, it's a new economy of that we can't just have one kind of job and have it till our retirement. So I think with artists is the same thing, but as having an effect on the memory and the history, I think artists are doing a very poor job. Definitely, because I mean, look at the corporate media and how hegemonic it is, and what are the artists doing? Having few exhibitions and you know, showing works that, in the big part, I can say, doesn't really engage politically. Into really like pressing issues.
We are talking about non-commercial, not commercial art. I mean, everything at the end could be sold, but bought or whatever.
But yeah, that's my disappointment about art in general.
Okay, so you think it should be more radical in terms of political engagement?
Yes, I think so. And I experienced that also specifically in Netherlands when you know, probably you can correct me because you've been living there as well, where art and activism is kind of a taboo relation. You know, is no. If you know, you become completely immediately a stereotype of a leftist complaining artist. Which is a shame, you know, but of course, you know, the Dutch has this tradition of formalism and minimal art, which has been funded and appreciated through decades, if not centuries.
But also I want to add something that responsibility, it's in a way have to, for everybody, not only artists, but okay, we are artists or involved in art, and I will say responsibility, because it doesn't matter what we do, we change things. We do or not, with intention, without, with good motivation or not, we do things. So it's good to don't add to the noise of today more. I will think like that.
So do you suggest like silence?
No, not silence, but having strategies also in this. Because if it's noise from both sides, we end up not hearing anymore. And also, I don't think that necessary artists are superior. only because they suffer, or so. We are intelligent, hardworking, and so on. If we really want to make a difference, we have to find other strategies. And I was curious if in the next museum here will be a place also for these new artistic strategies in real politics.
You have to tell him.
Yeah, I was curious because I'm amazed what artists are creating today, like guerrilla gardening, guerrilla architecture for homeless, all these things. The silent performance in Istanbul, I thought, was very powerful.
Silence performance.
Yeah. You don't need to fight on all the streets. He made a statement, and people around understood, and also I understood perfectly, and I was paying attention and so on. So,
but what was the political effect of that? Where was it efficient?
Okay, now, I mean, we want the effect to be now. I understand.
I'm curious because I'm trying to understand.
Okay, I don't know how to measure, but for me it was very effective.
It seems to me that well, the effect is even more repression and more, you know, like more suppression. It's not. I don't know if maybe it cracked something, but maybe the effect will show later. Like in that sense, so I'm questioning myself because that act it's like it's an art piece in a way, but then
also political.
Yes, well, it was seen.
Because of the context.
Yeah, I'm not sure if because it kind of certain circles we can understand it politically because we know the aesthetic of, you know, like you have the, but then was this what kind of things it produced there, or what was the aim?
You know, I have an image who had a huge impact on me. Tiananmen Square, the guy who stopped the tanks. I don't know. We don't know what happens with that guy. We know only the picture, and that event was there in April '89. But that image makes me think that I'm very powerful. And individuals are very powerful, even through these gestures. So I learned a lot.
No, the thing is, how do we know if this was, how do you know if it really happened or it was staged?
What?
By politics, like, because, you know, that's the whole thing, I think, with your, like, the media representation, and then that's my problem, and I'm never certain, you know, like, you end up in conspiracy theories, I guess.
No, I don't like this.
So it's like, how do we know if this was really an act or it was staged? So that's always
you know, a lot of people, because of the Knowledge Museum, I have this project. A lot of people tells me, you really believe that we were on the moon? I was not there, I don't know. But then the question is, do I want to believe that we were like humans, capable to go on the moon? I don't care. We're Russians, Americans, I don't care. For me, there are humans, brain, who went there. And for me, it's important to believe that we were there.
Yeah, well, for me, in that aspect, because I also think sometimes about, you know, thinking about media and image making. I also think about, like, is it really true or not? But at a certain moment, it doesn't matter anymore, because what is really important is what comes after the event, and to understand how, you know, those events are used for certain kind of ends. That's what I was trying to say also in my talk.
Sometimes if we listen, really we learn a lot, maybe more than when we talk. So if you look at your films, you see very clear both sides. why somebody is treated in a certain way, because herself or himself was having doubts about themselves. So sometimes even us, you know, at the beginning I was like going in West like that, oh, you know, I'm Romanian, I knew that we have bad reputation and so on and so on, and I was like, Romania. And after that, slowly I cooled down, I relaxed, I saw, unfortunately, good people, bad people everywhere. Everything is relative. That's why also it's good also to look at ourselves. You know, after the fall of communism in Romania, after the revolution, everybody was pointed who was guilty, the dictator. We find the man, and everybody was like, fool, you know. We finish, we kill him, and so on. Was not true. All of us had their small or bigger part in what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping silence, or not doing anything, or waiting, or postponing to think or to know what they want. Everything could be a mistake, and empower the other one way too much.
Okay. Speaking of responsibility for a moment, my point would be that maybe the strength of art, when it comes to deconstructing the established patterns of, you know, of knowledge, of interpretation, etc., the existing power structures, is exactly its irresponsibility. The fact that an artist can afford to be irresponsible, in the sense that
not anymore, that from my point of view,
he or she can entertain different possibilities, create fictional kind of scenarios, and by this very way subvert, you know, something that we have got used to treating and experiencing as, you know, something natural, and thus something necessary. So what do you think about this idea that the strength of art lies in its irresponsibility?
I don't believe in this anymore. Was once upon a time, and a lot of freedom. No, not anymore, I think. That's why I'm mentioning this responsibility. And I give you an example. In LA, one of the students of Chris Burden was wearing a gun, he wanted to make a performance in the university, wearing a gun, because was already an attack in one Virginia Tech, maybe, or I don't know exactly in which year. And the board of the university kicked out the teacher of Chris Burden and not the student. Because Chris Burden, you know, in '74, he had this performance in which he let himself shot, willing to talk about violence and destruction, self-destruction and so on. And okay, I don't know, it's not time to analyze the whole thing and both positions and so on. But for me, it was interesting that one performance done in '74 came around somehow and hit him. And now, recently, I think last year, in Florida, Miami Art Fair, somebody was stabbed. A tourist, viewer, whatever.
It was a fight.
I think was a performance. And this is terrible. Because I saw two images, the girl who was attacked and the girl who attacked. They were Asian type of girls. So I thought that they were together because a little bit, the one who was the aggressor, she was looking like, did you document? I think it's sickness already, this. It's a kind of, for the next generation, a kind of scream.
But
Do you
talking
want
more
me
about
to
the
put a
morality
needle
of,
in my head to impress you, to have my place and so on? Sorry.
I think you're talking more about the morality of art, or
responsibility of our gestures.
But that's different, no?
This doesn't mean to don't have the courage to address certain issues and so on, but a little bit look at the context with empathy, maybe, to position it in different positions, to see your intervention, what will do. And I think it's not only a responsibility for artists or critics or art historians or institutions or whatever, even like the citizen. We are in a big mess. So we continue with this, or we try to make sense how we can.
I totally agree that actually being a citizen is even more, maybe that's the place where we have to, practicing citizenship becomes now more effective than practicing artship, maybe.
The scientists are saying that if we don't collaborate, we will not survive. All the time was a kind of emergency of collaboration in order to survive. But now, more than ever, we have 100 or 200 years, the most, to figure out how we get out of this planet, because we exhaust. And we have to collaborate to combine all the minds.
Okay, if there's no more comments.
Oh, he tried to escape.
Yes.
After responsibility.
Oh, all right. So I'd like to invite the audience to engage in our discussion by addressing the topics that we've already touched upon, or maybe you have some.
No, there's a chance for the last comments. Yeah. It's very exciting.
Yes.
Or last.
About responsibility, I think it's responsibility or irresponsibility is something to do with the response. First of all, so, and when you are talking that you are making your own decision, so is it a response to something? That's one comment. And secondly, I think it's highly dangerous to put moral standards on art and to say that artists are not responsible if they are, for example, letting to shoot themselves in the shoulder, because just saw Wiener Actionist exhibition in Berlin, where people are saying, oh, it's so old-fashioned that he's injuring himself, but actually the message of performances like these are that I own my own body and I can do what I want to do with my body. And if we put the moral standards that artists shouldn't be irresponsible, that they are using their own body as they wish, then we have, like in Latvia now, the discussions that politicians decide whether women should be allowed abortion or to get artificial fertilization. So we come back to the same actually questions which in those days, in the 70s, were discussed, and right now we are kind of like putting them out of the social discussion by saying that what I'm doing with my body is irresponsible to others. It's not. Or did I? What was that?
You understood me right. I wanted to say only that when it's too much to continue. When will be?
Too much?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look around. If you feel, it's my point of view. If you, if we all start to be too responsible and so on, then I will be very happy to see some irrational people coming in, you know. I want to say only that now it's a moment of too much. All these people who blow themselves up, they don't blow themselves because they are happy. So a little bit maybe I feel like that, to put on hold maybe what I will want to do and pay attention to the one who screams. It's not efficient if I will scream too, because it's a pressure also on me, everything what happens. But then I said, okay, we cannot scream all, then I want to listen them. Why? What happens? Why? And what I can do. It's only what I want to say. And you know, actually, all the time, when we start to discuss something, some issues, we go back. Why? I mean, I'm not a square head to go in 70s.
Why are you making archive if you don't want us to look back?
Because
why
I find this idea that the people who are building archives believe in future. I think I believe in future, not in past. And everything I try to learn and read and so on. So when I say I bet on education, I don't refer to strict education. I borrow all the analysis and critiques of 70s. So when I say education, I don't want to go back to the discussion in 70s. I want to have it new ideas of today and the needs.
To respond to you, I think there is maybe more than two things, but the two things that just comes to my mind in relation to art and responsibility is, you know, the art for the art's sake, and the art that tries to have a certain kind of relation to some other topics. So if you ask me, I would say art for the art's sake is completely passé, and it was actually more a kind of CIA movement of sponsoring certain artists to produce art that doesn't do anything except confirming the political situation. Whereas I'm completely agree with you against like putting a certain kind of moral on art. I think actually it is the responsibility of the artist to break the taboos, you know.
Yeah, but Chris Burns' self-injury wasn't. You can't call it art for art's sake. It was a political act. I mean that performance in the 70s when he let to injure himself.
No, that's certainly not.
It wasn't art for art's sake. It was a politically responsible art.
Yes, of course. But no, I just wanted to respond to what is the morality in art and what is the responsibility. So I'm not saying that work was you know irresponsible or responsible art. I think that was a really good work in kind of reflecting. It wasn't art for art's sake. It was a reflection into what was happening in that moment.
Just a short comment. When I speak of irresponsibility, I mean it in a positive, productive way. I mean like not having to, you know, respond to account for your action, for your work in terms of, you know, the existing, let's say, understanding of what is admissible and what is not. So, and this is maybe this, you know, a higher or more refined kind of artistic responsibility, as I understand it. Being able to not to be irresponsible, not to limit oneself in one's artistic practice by the accepted standards of what is admissible and what is not.
We have another last question from the audience. I think it should be the last.
Yes, but not the least. in the beginning of March, the 2 days conference took place in New York City Library about archives. Now here you are talking about archives. And in the middle of April, in British Library, a 2 days conference about archive will be placed. What do you think? Why so huge interest about archives right now? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I will readdress it to panel participants. Why so much interest in the archives right now?
I think it's also the question for the organizers, because the topic of archives, or we're kind of assembled here under that umbrella because there was some interest.
Because our interest was, as we said in the introduction, was to look back at our archive, which is, let's say, starting from the 90s, and that also goes back more in the history of non-conformist, if we could call it like that, art of the Soviet time, and that also sort of continues to nowadays. But like this bordering line when the archive actually was established was these 90s, and so we are actually thinking of what to do with it in the future, and what kind of story it can tell, like how to continue. So that is, let's say, also the questions that we don't really have answers for. And that maybe is more like a practical reason why we thought to assemble many people that deal with the archives as curators or researchers or artists alike. And I think like there were a lot of things that somehow appear to be said today that actually are also very topical for our archive and its possible futures or even possible pasts or some kind of, for example, when Vesna would speak about the violence in the archive, we would also think about our archive as a certain kind of selection, you know, which it cannot include everything, but then of course there are certain choice of certain artists that are included in this archive and certain are not, and then now we can still look back at the 90s and we can still find a lot more artists or documents or things that are there and they can still be somehow picked up. And also, as Jagna is working in Poland, you can still work with the archives from the 60s and 70s. But I think the time will somehow pass, and then at one point it will all not be accessible anymore, and then it will be somehow even not worse about thinking of about that because it will be somehow already lost. So I mean, there is, I think, maybe also this working with archive for me seems to be a little bit like a hygiene that you do, that you sort of all the time try to look back and to sort of see, is it right, or are we going the right direction? Have we been going the right direction? Or maybe we should criticize what we have been doing the past couple of years, you know, and to look back critically. I think it's, I guess it's like a never-ending process also.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, it's a good question, but I don't think any one of us has answered why suddenly a huge interest.
Yes.
Because obviously either, you know...
Is this consistent or not?
It's like maybe we don't know what to do anymore with those archives, or the question is what do we do with those archives now when also we are all small archiving machines, you know, and then do you really need, you have personal stories, personal narratives, personal archives, it's an overproduction of everything, but you were saying this kind of noise, yeah, it's, we are overproducing also.
Yeah, it's also the digitization. That since everything is kind of digitized, then we are still like considering and thinking what to do with you know, the archive that is not digital. And you know, just it reminds me of a friend of mine who got about 6 boxes of this side of slides from an art school, which was though to be thrown away because they digitalized everything for their you know, art history schools. So they wanted to throw away all these like slides. So she saved them from the bin, and now she's wondering what to do with them. So that's, I think, I don't know. I think the archive is a conversation that you should always have, because it's extremely important what to do with your past, and how the past decides on the future.
I had one remark. You mentioned digitization, and then before there was a question, why archives? We started, well, our interest with archives started with digitization. We started to digitize our archive, and then we were just, yeah, really looking and going through the materials, and yeah, and in a way also discovering from the beginning, and yeah, that was just a remark for that.
But I mean, there are a lot of reasons. It's also to question institutions and mainstream histories and archives and so on. Depends. For Zdenka Badovinac, again, I will name her because it's one of the first who was interested in archives and so on, because she observed that in former East Europe, a lot of artists were trying to build archives for many reasons, and was actually a job which an institution should do.
It's like a self-documentation.
Yeah,
like, yeah.
Yes, yes. But artists took their lives in their hands somehow and did what they could, seeing that nobody cares. They care because and actually we live out of some works which we did during the communist time now, because we document them. Otherwise, will be nothing. We will be erased, and somebody will create, I don't know, a story for us, a frame for us, how they will want. For instance, for Eastern Europe, you have to be very political. Your body have to be, you know, Bojana Page, who was having a lot of theories on this. Or like, I mean, I can give a lot of examples. There are different reasons. Decolonialization, it's another subject. The pressure we create towards the institution in the West, coming with a new history and contemporary history, they have to re-evaluate in their way. Yeah. But also how we evaluate and we create analysis or words for our experience. Many, many reasons.
I just wanted to ask, like, there was a bit of contradiction earlier on when you were talking about this honest need and to build something true, but then it became more about like belief. Like, do we have an opinion of like, which is it? Like, is it about building a belief system, or is it about like the endless discovery of truth?
At one point you said you don't care if people, human beings have been on the moon, right? So you don't care about the truth.
But it's like
yeah. But is that what you meant about being on the moon or not?
No, but then it sort of like became more about creating a belief system instead of
not a belief. I mean, I don't want to impose anything or whatever. What we do, for sure, it's a cumulus of a lot of things. What we read, our context, our thoughts. We detect all kinds of needs, personal needs or community needs or whatever. When I said I built my archive out of my needs, so because I was doing a kind of performance without knowing what is a performance, then I had to read books on performance art, and Romanians didn't write them. So I read them by Americans, by Europeans, Germans, French, whatever, British, and so on. I borrow something from them, and I try to understand what I was doing and my context. I mean, you adapt, but I think if it's something true behind, like a reason behind, makes sense. Otherwise, it's fake. And sooner or later, I saw also a lot of fake archives, especially in the last years, because the institutions start to be interested in this. Immediately, somebody was going in stores, photo studio, and recuperate abandoned negatives. Okay, you can do, yes, of course, whatever, but also I'm free to say why you give me this, why you force me to look at something. Maybe I don't know, you stole my time. I ask for some respect. In these terms, I was talking about responsibility a bit. I mean, it will be a longer discussion.
Thank you, Lia. I hope we haven't stolen anyone's time here, but yes, we have been very persistent in increasing our archive literacy, right? In our understanding of what archives are and what creative possibilities there are of engaging with them.
A lot of possibilities.
Thank you all for participation, and that's it.
Thank you for you very interesting. I learned a lot.
Thank you for participating, for coming. Thanks, Igor, for moderating the last part. And thank you so much for sitting here in this cold day called the underground space.